All right, Catherine, thank you so much for being here on the All Bets Are Off podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Robby.
This is going to be fun, and I'm looking at it as an extension of our conversation that we had on your show.
Yes, yeah, that was a lot of fun. Yeah. You're so talented. It's incredible. It really is.
Well, I appreciate that, but today we're going to talk about your talents because it's all about you today. So, my first question for you is, again, this is one that I know the answer to, but I want my listeners to get to know you. Is how old you were when you truly realized that you had this psychic ability?
So I was about 9 years old. My dad liked to go fishing. So out of my sister and I was more of the tomboy. So he would take me fishing and hunting and camping and all sorts of things like that. And one day he said, "We're not just going to go fishing." He said, "We're going to go crabbing." And he said, "We're going to go to the dock." And he was very like detailed oriented. He was like, "We're going to have this crab net and we're going to put the bait in it and we're going to drop it in the water. And when it hits the ground, the doors are going to open." And so I totally got it. We went to the dock and I was the only girl on the dock. And there was all these little boys lined up and everybody was fishing. And he threw the net in and he walked over to talk to the little boys. And my dad was 6'2", and the minute he walked away, I heard, "Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up," like in my ear, literally in my ear. And I was like, "Okay, what do I do with that?" So I just started pulling on the rope. And as I was pulling on the rope, it was like getting louder. And he snorted out of the corner of his eye. And he started like road marching back to me. And I was like, "Oh my God." So I just launched it out of the water. And when I launched it out of the water, there was the biggest blue crab that day in the net. And all the little boys came running over. And I was like, "Oh, this is cool." I was like, "I'm going to listen to that voice." And my dad kind of looked at me like he was kind of perplexed. Like part of him wanted to like yell at me for like not following directions. The other part was like he was like, "I'm going to eat this." So he did eat it. I refused to eat it. I was horrified by it. I was like, "I'm not eating that." And so right after that happened, oddly enough, and it wasn't until many years later when I started to talk to other people. Sometimes it takes one event like that for someone like in your subconscious and your conscious meet that it just opens a door. And like right after that happened, I started having very vivid dreams,
Hmm.
dreams about things that, about people I knew. Some dreams I couldn't understand. Some of them were very predictive. So I thought because my dad was like my best friend, I should just like start telling him about these dreams. And unfortunately, some of them were not so good. I had a dream that the lady across the street was going to pass away. So like I told my dad and I was like, "Oh, she's going to pass away." And he was like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, she was always in a wheelchair. She had had a stroke in
Mhm.
our living life and she was very frail. And I used to go over and help her and her husband with the medications and whatever. I was probably like around 12. And I used to like pick her up out of the wheelchair. She was so light. And she was standing out of her wheelchair in the dream
Mhm.
and she hugged me. And as she hugged me, they had a very long driveway, like in our living life. And the cat that I grew up with was running up the big driveway and circled around the wheelchair.
Mhm.
And I was like, "Well, Toy Toy, our cat, is dead. So that means if this lady's standing out of the wheelchair, she must be dead too." So I told my dad, and my dad was like super Roman Catholic. He was really like going to church every Sunday, not like his sister had been a nun. And this was just like beyond, his comprehension. So he's like, "Knock it off. We don't talk like that." And probably several hours later, there was a knock at our door, and it was the lady from across the street, her daughter. And she said that the day before, she had taken her mom to the hospital and she died.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's when my father turned around and he was like, "Knock it off." We're definitely not talking like this again. And, I have to be honest, I was very close to the lady. And I really felt relieved that the dream was true because I didn't like even being 11 or 12, that kind of young age. I didn't want to be sitting waiting for it to happen
Mm.
because I had such a real feeling. It's kind of like when you walk into a test and you're like, I'm going to ace this test. Like, you don't know how you know it, you just know it. And I felt a little relieved. I mean, it sounds probably awful to say that, but I didn't want to be waiting for that to happen. My young mind knew that it was
Mm.
true. And then, I just started kind of going on like that, knowing that I had to keep all this to myself. And that was really hard.
Yeah. Now, is this something where you, as you're developing this, I say developing because I don't really know the proper term for it,
Sure.
but when you're developing this ability, is it one of those things where it's like the more you use it, the stronger it becomes, or do you just not have control of it and it's just there?
Yeah, I would have to say both for me because I think I was kind of born this way. So it's kind of like when someone picks up, like in your life, picks up a guitar and they just like start doing it and they're like, I don't know how I do it, I just do it.
Mm.
But also, I think when you kind of like for me, I actually, as a young person, felt like I accepted this,
Mm.
like maybe I'm gifted. So I accepted it, so I felt like if I saw stuff, I could trust it. So it's kind of like, someone being a young, person picking up the guitar, I could play it. But then looking around the room and realizing that the other kids in the room can't play like that. So as much as you want to like show off, you know that you can't.
Mm.
So you kind of keep it inside, but knowing that you keep it inside, part of you knows that you're already at a little bit of a level higher than other people. So it just grows, because it really comes from a piece of your consciousness meeting with your unconscious, but it's based on, and I truly believe this, even with musicians, it's based on your confidence.
Mm.
So ever since I was a little kid, I felt pretty confident. I mean, even if I gave the wrong answer at school, that was the answer I had. So I was confident in my wrong answer, And I think having that in your personality, I could accept being wrong, but I was confident at the time that I was possibly right.
Yeah.
So I think that actually helps people, like musicians or people like in my kind of way of living, that if you believe in yourself, that actually keeps you always at a level higher
Mm.
because you already believe in your gift.
Well, that makes sense. And, I did read both your books, so I know that you also went out and made sure that you became educated in these things. So tell me a little bit about like that thought process for you, because you're already confident that you have it and you could do it, but you went to seek further education on it. So,
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So as I was growing up in my teens, my father's side of the family was Italian and Spanish. My mother's side was Irish. So at my father's family, they were always serving espresso, always having big dinners and stuff. So whenever they were serving espresso, I would lean over and I'm like, oh, let me look in your cup, and they're like, why are you looking in my cup? And I'm like, well, don't you see this image? And they were all kind of all looking at me, but whatever I was saying to them was making sense.
hmm.
So they were like, and my cousins were all excited. They were like, oh, yeah, you definitely got to do our cup after dinner and all this. So I already kind of felt a little gypsy. And, and it was fun. But when I have to be honest, I had to join the military. So I wanted to get a bachelor's degree. I was already a nurse. So I had to join the military to get a bachelor's degree and I became an officer.
Hmm.
So being in the military, I just thought I have to focus on that. So I really went straight forward and did a lot of that. But when I came back from Iraq, there was a few things that happened in Iraq that my battle buddy was like, you have to promise me, literally, like if we get out of here alive, that you will work with the public.
Mm,
because you really have a gift that has to be shared. So she's my battle buddy. We both retired as full colonels, and her name is Denise Calisi. And I promised her. So when I came home, I said, Dad, I really think that, I need to be tested on this because people are saying I need to do this. So my dad was like, I don't want any family member of mine being called a charlatan.
mm,
So whatever you can do to get tested, he said you need to do it. So I found out that a place in England called the Arthur Findlay College of Psychic Mediums is actually in Stansted, England, which is 2 hours outside of London.
mm,
So I went to that school just to be tested. I thought I was going to be like in the lowest class. They actually set you up with like a roommate. So I went to my room and my roommate was there. And I said, I saw my name on the list, and this is the first time I'm here. I really think that I'm like in like the basic beyond beginner class. And she said, why? I said, well, there's only 9 names on my list. So she said, I've been here many times. She said, I really focus on trance work, like putting people into trance. And I'm looking at her like, oh my gosh, So she walked me down to the list and she said, do you see that name? And I said, yeah, I don't know that person. She said, that's me. And I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, how am I on the Beyond Basic with you? And she said, no, this is the top class. This is by Saman Key. That's the tutor. And I said, oh my God, I said, I don't know why they're putting me in that class.
mm.
And then when they put me in that class, within the first 4 hours, which was really vigorous, they actually, believe it or not, gave us exercises where they like blindfold us. They make us do things like give readings so that we can't really see what, people are like making faces or whatever. And within 4 hours, she said to me, you're in the right spot. She said, I've been coming here several times. So I
Wow.
came home and I said, Dad, Arthur Finley said that I was in the top class, and Simon Key said that I can do it. They're pretty tough there. My father said, I'm not satisfied. What do the Americans say? So I had become friends with a very well-known medium. She was one of the pioneers from like the late 1960s. Her name is Suzanne Northrup.
Mm,
She said to me, you need to get tested by a group in Long Island called the Forever Family Foundation. So the Forever Family Foundation tested me, and they were very upfront. They said that they certify one person a year, and they felt very strongly that there's a lot of people that don't really know what they're doing,
mm,
and they actually don't provide evidence of spirit. Like
mm.
talking to those that are passed on has to really match the person that is really passed on. So I said, well, I'll just get tested. I was very upfront with them. I told them that I was a witch and that I have, I'm part of a group in Salem. They
Mhm.
were fine with that. And I was certified in 2013. The
Wow.
first phone call that I made was to my dad. And I was like, Dad, guess what I got in the mail today? And my father's like, something from the army? Because he was really like pro military. And I said, no, even better. He said, what could be better than the military? And I said, the Forever Family Foundation. So he was really impressed. And it was after that he basically said, okay, you know, 2 different groups, 2 different countries. I have to just kind of agree to this. And I don't know where you got it from, but you know, he kind of had somewhat peace with it. He
Mhm.
did get a chance to read my book. And like you said, once I got involved, a lot of my friends were like, oh, you have to go sit for a week with James Von Prague,
Mhm.
who's a very well-known medium, and even though you're a practicing medium, to go to a development class or to sit in circle with other mediums, we always encourage that, especially in the beginning, because even though I knew I was giving, very good readings, excellent readings,
Mhm.
it's the idea that you still need to sit with other people, just like you as a musician,
Yeah.
that you've toured or you've done these things, but to sit in a circle with other guys jamming and stuff, You need to have that. It raises the vibration and it raises the camaraderie, that you're all in it in the same, with the same belief, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to stay on the topic of your books because we've already mentioned them a couple times without getting too far in. I don't want to give away everything that you write in the book, obviously, because I want people to buy it. But I do want you to talk about your first book and where they could get it and what made you decide to write it.
Oh, cool. So I have it here. I don't know if I can just hold it up to the camera, but it's seeing more than clouds in my coffee and in your coffee. And it's kind of an interesting book. It's my first book. If you look at the back of it, it's kind of interesting here. But there's a lot of graphics there, and it's all about Grand Central Station. And that was done on purpose because I named my company Dream Central Station after Grand Central Station. My father used to work above Grand Central Station in the 1960s, and when it was called the Pan Am Building.
Mm,
And when we were little girls in the 70s, my dad used to take us to work every once in a while. And there's this amazing escalator that you would go up in the escalator. And he would say, look up to the ceiling. And I don't know if you've ever been there, Robbie. You've probably been there, right? The
mhm.
constellation that's on the ceiling.
Yeah.
He would like be fascinated with that because, and I talk about it in the book, but the artist made that ceiling very particular, and you'll hear about it in my book. But the concept of Grand Central Station is people would take trains to get to Grand Central to get somewhere else. And I thought that concept was great. People that have a problem, people that have a question, or people that are in grief, they come to me to get to somewhere else in their life.
Mhm.
So that's why I named it Grand Central Station. I mean, Dream Central Station off of Grand Central Station. And the artwork on the cover, front and back, is all depictions of me in New York City with that premise.
Mhm.
But that book primarily was for me inspired by people. A lot of people started wanting me to do coffee readings, not just my family,
Mhm.
but people were having like psychic fairs and like emailing me going, are you the coffee lady? Like people started calling me the coffee lady from Yonkers, like, are you the coffee lady? So I would bring my coffee maker, and I was very particular because I needed china cups.
Mhm.
So I did like a psychic fair, which I was like, oh, I'm going to be like reading a book, like no one's going to come to my table. And I know, Robbie, you do public events too,
Yeah.
where you can get one or two people stopping and then like no one's coming by for a while. So I thought, oh, I'll just bring a book. And the minute they saw me like pouring hot coffee, and this line formed, and it was all women. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was running out of cups. And some of the women online, they literally like pitched in and they were like, where's the sink? They literally acted like PTA moms or something, like literally running and like washing these cups for me just so that everyone could get a chance. And it was at that public event that I realized the curiosity because they didn't really want a reading.
Mhm.
But the minute I showed them the image in that cup, the reading made sense.
Mhm.
So for some people, if I just stand there and start telling them stuff, they get freaked out. They're like, where are you getting it from? But if
Yeah.
I could physically say, like, I could see it in your cup, people are like, oh, okay, well, I see that image. That makes sense. And so all of these cups were so detailed that this was like when we were using flip phones. People were taking out their flip phones and taking pictures of the cup.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, that's really great because they can't take the cup with them. So I was like, this is great. And some of the stories, like I would say, this is what the image means to me.
Mhm.
How can you see that in your life? And then the women were actually telling me, this is exactly what happened to me. And this is not me in the cup. This is my sister in the cup. And this is what happened in our family. The minute they gave me the backstory, that image in the cup had like a bigger meaning. And I was like, wow, these stories really need to be captured. So I started writing them down. And of course, I changed all of the names,
Yeah.
but I started getting people of all walks of life contacting me, police officers and all sorts of occupations contacting me. And it wasn't always for coffee. It was the idea that someone they knew had a coffee cup reading and said, we don't know what's going on with this lady, but we know that she can see stuff nobody else can see.
Wow.
So, so that was really the first book. And I was very glad that my dad had the grace to read it and give me feedback. And it's a very personal book. He was very attached to one of his cats, and I talk about his cat and, the sudden passing of his cat. And it really wove in different aspects of my relationship with people and how I've been able to help people, especially like when you think of yourself and you say, oh, well, you have this relationship with someone. Your relationship, it doesn't matter if it's a parent, a sibling, a friend, even if it's for 40 years, you look back at different parts of your life. That relationship was with the same person, but that relationship changes over time.
Mhm.
And when I wrote that book and I really reflected back on a lot of those stories, it really shows that as you grow, so does the relationship that you have with people in your life. Because certain things when you're younger, you can't imagine like ever seeing yourself at a certain point with this person, especially parents.
Yeah.
Parents or siblings, you just have this. I had this idea as a very young girl that my dad, was always going to be there to like save me. It's this kind of like
Yep.
dad's my savior. And as I got older, his health started to fail and he had more needs. And I really realized that I ended up saving him, especially medically. I became a nurse and I was able to hook him up with people. And so he got me through the first part of my life, but I kind of got him through the last part of his life.
Mm.
So that book to me is a big reflection on making connections with people, but also making impacts with people.
Well, and so then you go and decide to do another book, and this book is not just about your abilities and stories, but this is about you in general. It's not just about you. Of course, a big part of you are your abilities, so that's in there. But there's a lot of about music, your personal relationships, and what made you decide? Okay, well now I'm just going to write a whole nother book and we're going to take a different avenue here. So walk us through that.
It's kind of interesting because I didn't want to write another book. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. And
Mm.
it was actually people that follow me. I was getting messages from people that I didn't remember reading. I read for so many people. And I was getting private messages like on Instagram and, like, Facebook and whatever. People sending me messages saying, we know about the first book, or we know what you told us, but we don't know about you.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of people kind of like one of the biggest trends I saw in all these private messages was that like they were like, you're such a cool chick. Like, we never saw anyone like live a life like you. And I was like, wow, I didn't see myself as a cool chick. But I guess to them, to be able to be a psychic medium, to have so many friends in the music business, and then to be also like a professional nurse, and on top of it, to be a retired colonel.
Yeah.
Some people would be surprised to do one of those things, and I was been able to do all of those things. So I was like, okay, let me look at it.
Mm.
And I didn't, I don't like to like focus on me. Like anyone, especially that knew me, like in service, I was always like pushing everyone ahead of me. Like, make my soldiers look good. Like everybody, like, I'm not a spotlight person at all. And I started to say, okay, well, a lot of people ask me, like, has anyone in your family did anyone have this gift? And my mom died when I was 16 suddenly. So I didn't really have the chance to ask her. And no one in that side of the family tree, my cousins, nobody could remember anybody like that. My father's side, nobody could remember anyone like that. But I remembered a story that happened to me when I was like 14. I was a real young teenager, and I was like, we were very independent because my mother really wasn't that well in life. My sister and I would go shopping on our own or walk into town on our own. We would do a lot. It was like the 80s, right? So supervision was different then. So I would walk into town and like buy makeup and stuff. And this guy drives by and he was blasting in like a little sports car the song Hotel California. And I've always been like, I was always like a Rolling Stone. I would always buy the magazine, I was always music since I was a little girl. And my head swung around. And I saw this guy get out with like long dark hair, and I was like, oh my God, here I am like 14, like, oh my God. So I think he sees me, and I'm like, oh my God. So I run into like this pharmacy, like to get my makeup or whatever. And I come out, and he's waiting for me. And I was like, oh my God, like, what is this, a movie? And so he was like, he was interested in me, and I was just like freaked out. I was like, oh my God, he doesn't know I'm like 14 and whatever. He totally was like older than me, you know. And I was like, oh my God. So he was a drummer, so of course he was music. So it
Yeah,
was just
yeah.
like, oh my God, we have to meet my best friend, you have to meet my sister. And so we were all hanging out. It was we're teens, so there's nothing super dramatic. But in his conversations about music and being in a band and whatever, he would take me on drives in this little sports car. He asked me one day, he said, I haven't been able to meet your mom. Is that her standing in the doorway? And I said, oh yes. And he said, I want to meet her. And he starts out of the car, and I'm like very protective because my mother was a very bad alcoholic. So I was trying to like, no, 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 you don't want to meet her. I didn't know what condition she was in. So he kind of forced his way like forward, and she opened the door and he shook her hand.
Mm.
And she was very pleasant. I didn't really, take note of what condition she was in, but I, scurried him back to the car. And he said, get in the car again. And I was like, well, we were just in the car. Like, what is this? So I sat in the car, and he held out his arms, and he was wearing like short sleeves.
Mhm.
And he said, feel my arms at the same time. And I felt them. And one arm was cold and one arm was hot. And I was like, wow, that's weird. What's going on? And he said, that's your mom. And I said, what do you mean that's my mom? He's like, she's a witch. And I was like, what? And I had no idea anything about any of this.
Mhm.
My family was Roman Catholic. We went to Roman Catholic schools. I didn't know what he was talking about. And he was like, I'm a warlock. And I was like, you're a what? And I was like so freaked out. And I was like instantly like a little bit depressed instantly, because I was like, oh, here's this, great drummer, and now he's going to tell me he has something wrong with him. He's a warlock. Like, that was the last thing on my list. Right? You could be sick, you could be like, whatever, but warlock was not on the list that I thought. So, we didn't have the internet. It's like I don't know, 1983 or 84 or something like that.
Mhm.
And I said, wow. So he's like, yeah, you have to really read up about it, right? So I went back in the house, and I kind of waited till like 10 o'clock at night, and I got the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was like the internet of the time, which was like big books.
Mhm.
And I looked up like witch and warlock, and I was like, this is crazy. I was like, I can't believe this. Like, first of all, so I went running back to my sister and my best friend, and I'm like, so and so, because I'm not going to give his name out. So and so says he's a warlock, and they were like, like, are you kidding me? They were like, he's a drummer, like. and of course in the 80s, like some kids were doing drugs. So they were like, is he on drugs or whatever, whatever. And I was just like, oh my God, I need this like a hole in the head, right? Don't we have enough problems, right? So the two of them convinced me not to go to my dad, not to go to my mom, not to ask anything about witches or warlocks or anything, because my mom was already giving us enough, enough on our hands.
Mm. Yeah.
So I said, okay, that's it. But, the two of them really felt strongly that, I shouldn't hang out with him anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So well, you'll read the book, but there's a good reason why I don't hang out with him, and it's not because he was a warlock. So you'll see that in the book, kind of a thing. But it was really kind of interesting. So that was one of the stories that I had to put in there. That I kind of wanted to clear it up because a lot of people were sending me messages on social media like, everyone in your family must be a witch or a warlock or whatever. And it was only, I would have to say, only when I started working with the public after I got tested that I went up to Salem, Massachusetts, and I worked in Halloween for about 8 or 9 Halloweens. And Salem, Massachusetts is very strict. You have to work for a store owner and you have to apply for a license to actually give readings during Halloween. So
Oh,
you
wow.
actually wear a badge, and it's a 31-day badge. It's a license to give readings because they really want to protect their city and the history of the witches,
Hmm.
but also for giving readings because that's their livelihood up there.
Wow.
And that's what people do. So you have to live in Salem for a year before you can get an actual license for a resident. Because I lived in New York, I was only able to get that 31 day. So
Yeah.
I worked for a very famous warlock. He claims he's the most famous warlock in the world. His name is Christian Day. He actually went toe to toe with with a very famous person. I don't know if you would remember that, but it was Charlie Sheen. Sheen was going through some struggles at one point, and he claimed to TMZ that he was a warlock. So Christian Day actually came out and said, "No, I'm the most famous warlock," and it was kind of humorous. But so after working for Christian for 8 or 9 Halloweens, I ended up doing a lot of work with Lori Bruno. She's one of the oldest Italian stregas, which means witch in Italian. But I'm actually part of her church,
Mm.
and her church is in Salem. And you have to really, everyone says there's, churches and there's covens and there's all these things. You really have to have yourself in clarity, meaning like some people say, well, I'm a spiritualist. But if you really talk to them, they don't really understand what a spiritualist is. And there's actually like, some people say there's 7 things that spiritualists believe in. Some people say there's 9 things that
Mm.
spiritualists believe in. And then people say, so what do you believe in being a witch? So, you have to align yourself with what you believe in. And I really kind of connected with Lori Bruno. She was very motherly like. A lot of people that know Lori instantly call her mama. But she believes in humanity. She believes in, this is, there's a God and a goddess. This is our earth. It's all about taking care of people, taking care of animals, taking care of, our plants and all of that. It's all encompassed in living life. And we don't do anything that's against life.
Hmm.
So when anyone says, oh, well, can you do spells? Sure, I'll whip up a love spell for you. I do really positive things, but I do not do anything negative. I don't
Mm.
do any animal killings. I don't use any blood from any human or animal or anything like that. All of the things I do are really inspired by the moon. I talk a lot about doing like moon dances and moon spells, and the moon is actually very powerful. And I also do a lot with numerology. So Lori Bruno is like, a second mom to me. And it's really been kind of an inspiration to have her in the witch community because she worked very closely with Dr. Leo Louis Martello. And he was one of the pioneers back in the 1960s, who was an activist for the gay community, but also for the witch community. He held the first witch in New York City. And if you think about the 1960s and 70s, your mind automatically goes back to the play Hair. Remember? Hair and all that, everybody was going around in bell bottoms and long hair, and the idea of the community, the gay community, was not the way it is today. So Dr. Leo Louis Martello was a pioneer in giving the community a voice,
Mhm.
but at the same time, allowing people to believe that they can belong into a different religion and not feel bad about it, and not to be kind of shunned that it was this satanic panic stuff. And I talk about that most recently. I introduced you to Mike Schiff, who
Mhm.
is the producer of, the history of horror and metal and all that,
Yeah.
and that's brought up in that film as well. There was a whole thing even here in Yonkers, where I grew up, was that Son of Sam. Son of Sam was doing the killings. He was from Yonkers. So a lot of people, just without doing their research, they see, a symbol, and they say, oh, that's witchcraft, or oh, that's the Satan, the devil, the this, the that,
Mhm.
without saying, well, let me look what this person's doing with it. So
Yeah.
that's really about the biggest thing. My dad knew that I was involved in, Salem, and I knew I worked with witches and warlocks and everything. So I have to, he's in the afterlife now. I have to give him so much kudos to go from such a strict Roman Catholic. And, that is actually, and you're a dad, right? So
Yeah.
that is actually one of the biggest compliments for a father, that you're able to kind of recreate yourself with your child,
Mhm.
because it's really based on love. And so you love your child, so you don't want to change your love for your child. But if your child changes their beliefs, or they change how they want to live their life, or the love for your child, if it's that strong, you'll change along with it. So my dad was like, all right, you're going to Salem. Okay, you're working with a warlock. Like, okay, it's like, you know, if he was going to tell me not to do it, I'd still be doing it. And he knew it.
Mhm.
So, so that's like, that's a fatherly thing that I think you could totally, you could ignite with that one, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And before I move on to my next question, I just want you, because one thing we didn't do while we were talking about your second book is we actually didn't say the name of your second book or where they could
Oh,
get it. So
sure. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So this is it. And she danced by the light of the moon. I don't know if you could see that.
there we
And
go.
the artwork is actually done by Tony Squindo. He's the guy that does all the artwork for Metallica. And the back of the book is really incredible because it's all inspired. If you see, it's a girl that looks like me. Everything that's coming out of her mouth is everything I've done with my life. So it's the girl with the rifle and the coffee readings and the tarot cards and all of that. So Tony Squindo is doing a lot of work with Metallica. He's part of the M72 tour that they're doing right now. And he's really terrific. But that book, actually, when I look back and people say to me, like, what book do you like? The first book I really liked because it was the first time I ever put my thoughts down and retold the stories of others. The second book I felt forced to write, but it turned out to be more of my favorite, because I really realized that the people in my life, not just I impacted them, but they impacted me. I tell a
Mhm.
story about my ex-boyfriend who was in the music business, who died tragically. I tell a story about my aunt. There was just so many things in that book that you really realize. You say to yourself, like, why am I here?
Mhm.
Most of my life has been based in service, military, nursing, psychic, all service. And I always think, especially when I go to sleep at night, I think, so what did I do today? You know, whose life was I able to change? When I wrote that book, it was the first time I realized that these people helped change me,
Mm.
you know? And I was
Mhm.
just like, wow, you know, it's so deep sometimes when you look back at your life, you know?
Absolutely, and I wanna make mention again to my listeners that I did read both books fairly recently. I just finished the second one a few days ago, and they're excellent books, and I really urge everybody who's listening to this to check them out. And I guess that brings me to my next question, which is, with your abilities and the things that you can do and the things that you've seen, does it give you comfort because you're not one of those people that has to walk around and think, "Is there an afterlife?" Like, so there's
Mm,
gotta be a comfort in that.
yes. It's kind of interesting because I've seen it in different aspects of my life. And I saw it in nursing.
Mm,
I was a very young nurse in my early 20s, and I came on to my nursing shift, and there was a woman in the bed, and she said to me, "What time are visiting hours over?"
mhm.
And I said, "Well, I work 3 to 11." I think I might have been like 24 years old. And she said, "Wow." She says, "Well, 2 o'clock in the morning, my husband was standing at the bottom of my bed." And I said, "Well, that's impossible." I said, "Because they really, the cops, like the mall cops or whatever, the hospital cops, they walk around, and they scoot everyone out." And she said, "No, I swear he was there at the bottom of my bed."
Wow.
So I went back to the nurse's station. We got report, and I turned around. I used to work with this nurse who was older than me. She was like a kind of like a big biker chick. And I said to her, "You know the lady in this room?" She says, "Yeah." I said, "She said her husband was at the bottom of her bed at 2 o'clock last night." And she said, "Which room?" And I said the lady's name.
Yeah,
And she looked at me. She said, "Oh, no, her husband died a couple of years ago." And I said, "Well, she said he was at the bottom of her bed." And, the next day when I came on at 3 o'clock to
yeah.
do my rounds, she was gone.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, wow. I was like,
Wow.
wow. And it wasn't like her saying, "My husband died 2 years ago." She
Yeah,
was convinced he was there.
yeah,
And I was convinced because the way how convincing she was. And we worked on a cancer unit. So the biker nurse that I worked with, she knew these people. She had been on
yeah,
this floor, a year or 2 years, and some patients, they have cancer for a year or 2 years, so she would
yeah,
know the history. And when I saw that with my own eyes, and there was another time, Robbie, in nursing, that people say they have like a near-death experience or
yeah.
something. There was a patient whose blood sugar was dropping like right in front of us
Uh-huh.
drastically. So the doctor starts giving dextrose, like a big syringe of dextrose, like to bring this blood sugar up like rapidly.
Yeah.
And I'm screaming this guy's name,
Mhm.
"Mr. So and so, Mr. So and so." And I'm like so loud with my Yonkers accent. I'm like going. The guy comes out of it. And the doctor was like sweating because there's a certain point where they can literally go into like a coma over this.
Yeah, yeah.
And the the patient looks at me and he's staring at me and he said, "Were you saying my name?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said the name again, and his eyes were like fire. And I was like, "What is going on?" He said, "That's how I came back. You're mispronouncing my name." And it was getting me so mad. My God. But I was like, wow, he heard that. And a
Wow.
lot of people that talk about near death experiences, they talk about like going into the light or they go into the tunnel. And one of the things that all the doctors in my entire career have told me, that's why when you sit with someone who's dying, their hearing is the last sense to be lost. So
Yeah.
they always say, "Talk to people, talk to people." So this poor guy was probably going into the tunnel and I was screaming his name.
Oh my god.
I saved him with a Yonkers accent.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's something. So
Oh
with
my gosh.
with all this that we're talking about and all that being said, is there a possibility of a third book?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So, in the second book, I make mention of Doug Day, my ex-boyfriend, who died
Mhm,
tragically. And during my relationship with him, we were driving back and forth. We lived in New York City, and he had a motorcycle garage and car restoration place in Poughkeepsie. So
mhm.
we would be on the road back and forth with the dog and the truck and the whole thing. And we would pass this big rock, and there was a cross on the rock. And he would point to it and he would say, "Guess that guy didn't make it," because Doug had like a very dry sense of humor. And unfortunately, in 2021, Doug and the dog hit a tree on the Taconic, quite literally about 100 yards or so from that rock
Oh,
where that
wow.
white cross is. And when I write about that, which is so completely eerie, um, I had talked about Doug knew that I wanted to write a book about roadside memorials because Doug was alive when I wrote the first book. And I said, roadsides, when he would point to that all the time, um, roadside memorials apparently are different in every state. And some people say that there's certain states that will remove them. And a lot of states, I know you travel, right? You
Mhm.
probably
Yeah.
see them in different states.
Yep.
Sometimes you'll see a helmet on the side of the road.
Yep.
Sometimes you'll see a cross on the side of the road. There's a road in the Bronx. People actually put up, it looks like two dog houses on the side so that they can put all things of the person inside of them. It's just very creative, but at the time, before Doug died, I said, I really think that the public needs to know about roadside memorials. That'll be my book.
Mhm,
And this was the book that I ended up writing. So I do think that that roadside memorial book needs to come out. The reason why roadside memorials is so important to me, because, I have a sports car, I have a Porsche, I drive fast. I mean, a lot of people drive fast, but when you see a roadside memorial, most people say, "Oh, look how sad." What the reality is, the roadside memorial is a sign that says slow down, you
yeah,
know? And so it's really a preventative thing.
yeah.
So I do think that my best friend is Rob Catiano from Anthrax, Volbeat, the whole thing. He calls me Miss Misery. He goes, Miss Miserable. So for like 30 something years, my nickname has been Miss Miserable. And he calls me Colonel Death because he thinks all of this stuff is just too morbid for my own good. But it's pretty funny. I mean, he's like literally like heavy metal king over here, and he's
Yeah.
calling me Colonel Death.
Yeah.
Pretty funny. But I do think that roadside memorials are very important to people that are grieving,
Mhm,
because a lot of times when people do die in a tragedy like that, sometimes there is no memorial.
mhm,
The person may not be able to have the physical body to bury. So that becomes the grave. Um,
mhm.
there's a lot to it. I know it's probably morbid for most people, but I'll have to get on it.
I remember that story from your book. I didn't realize that it was, so close to the other memorial that you would drive past, um, and that I'm gonna kinda try and segue this into just your abilities in general here because you offer, readings through your website, correct?
I do, yeah.
So, is that you can do virtual readings then? It doesn't have to be face to face, is that correct?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Actually, during COVID, everyone had asked for Zoom because of COVID, and all my readings are taped. And at the end of the reading, I send them the link so they're able to download and save that reading.
Huh,
And, I read for people all over the world. Last week, I read for someone in the Philippines,
wow.
and someone last week, Italy. So, to me, that is great because some people want to be in person, but to be honest, it's not physically possible, to be
Yeah.
in person. And, every once in a while, someone will want to do a psychic party. which we can do. We could do a coffee reading party, or we can do an in-person party. But even with that, Robby, I am so detailed that I want to take the person in a private space.
Hmm.
So even when someone has a party, I ask for a separate room, because information on your life, you might sit at a table and say, everyone in this room knows my life, but there's going to be a couple of things that no one at that table knows about your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah,
So
I bet.
I'm super big on being private, and everyone, once I say that, they're like, oh, yeah, of course. But then when you hear of other people going to other parties, they're like, oh, no, everyone stays at the table like it's a real seance.
Yeah.
But I just really believe in people's privacy,
Mhm.
because it's your life. It's not everyone else's.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I get you out of here, we have to have a little bit of fun. And
Okay.
we're going to do a lightning round. And you probably heard me do this with Jack. So these questions have nothing to do with you being an author or psychic or anything. This is just
Okay.
you and your personal feelings about these things, and it's just this or that. That's what we're looking for. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So first question: do you prefer? And I think I know the answer to this: Chicago or New York style pizza?
New York.
Yeah. How about dinner or dessert?
Dinner.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Poison or Motley Crue?
Oh, Motley Crue.
How about Ozzy or Alice Cooper?
Oh my God, that is really hard. Come on. I have to go with Ozzy.
All right. So, before I ask this next one, you're a horror movie fan?
Yes.
So, would you take Friday the 13th Part 1 or Halloween Part 1?
Oh my God. The first one.
So, you're going Friday the 13th?
Yeah.
All right. All right. All right. So, this one's a little bit of a thinker, and everybody gives me different answers. Some of them are really out there, so this will be fun. So, let's say you're going through the Bermuda Triangle. We're superstitious, all right? We're going through the
Yeah.
Bermuda Triangle. And do you wanna take a plane or do you wanna take a boat, and why?
Oh wow. I'm gonna take the boat. I'm gonna take the boat because I have something to hang on to.
Mm,
So even if the boat is like rocking, or I get tossed out of the boat, I could try to hang on to the boat. If the plane goes down, there's not going to be much left of the plane to hang on to. So at least I can hang on to the boat.
alright. Now, last 3,
Maybe
these are
maybe there's Monsters of Rock playing on that boat.
you know, that's what Jack said. He said, "I'm doing the cruise because 'cause I'm probably playing."
Well, if he's
Um,
playing, then I want to be on the boat.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Would you say, what would you say is your favorite, movie of all time?
Oh wow, that is so hard. Um, I actually have to say, can I give you three?
Sure.
All right, so one horror, I have to say, Omen.
Ooh, good one.
The original Omen,
Yeah,
amazing. I know they did a remake of it in like
yeah,
2006,
yeah,
and they advertised it as 666 or whatever, but the original one with Mia Farrow, that whole
yeah.
kind of whatever going on there, that was really crazy. A backup to that would be the Rosemary's Baby.
Mm,
Those two, The Omen and Rosemary Baby for horror, those are like my true blue ones.
yeah.
Um, did you ever see a movie called Sooner or Later?
I don't think so.
So that was filmed in Yonkers in 1979, and Rex Smith actually was in that movie. And Rex Smith was like a solo artist. He ended up like touring. He became like the street glider. He did like movies and TV and whatever. That's a local movie.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I have to say that there's another 1970s movie, and it's called Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York. Did you ever hear that one?
I have heard of that one, actually.
Oh, great. So Roy Scheider is my hero. Like, if I could take someone and say, I want to recreate, like, 'cause with all of our AI and our robots and whatever, So it's like, can you create like Mr. Right? I'm ordering up. I'm ordering up a Roy Scheider.
Yeah. All right. I like that answer.
He was in that. And believe it or not, that movie, a lot of people don't know about that movie, but he didn't really get along with the female actress in that
Mm.
movie. And that movie really strayed very far away from the original book, the
Oh, wow.
storyline. Yeah, his character was actually not in the storyline of the book.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, they
Wow.
actually made his character. Did you ever see Harold and Maude?
Yes.
Yes, that is another great one with Ruth Gordon, right?
Oh my God. Oh, you got some good picks.
Yeah, those are
But
good. I know I was only supposed to do one, but I did too many.
well, here's another one for you though, because you have two more lightning round questions left. And the
Okay.
next one is favorite TV show of all time.
Oh, wow. TV show. Facts of Life.
I was hoping you were going to say like Bewitched.
Oh, you know, I have a story about Bewitched, like
You do?
real story. You know, the actress, Elizabeth Montgomery,
Yeah, she
she
was
died
great.
in like 1994.
Yeah.
And I was working in New York City as a nurse, and I was reading the New York Times, and there was a little square, and it said estate sale, and it was like upstate, you know, like Putnam County.
Yeah.
So one of my friends had just gotten a BMW. So I called him up and said, "What are you doing over the weekend? Do you want to take your new car up there and bring me to this estate sale? It says it's a famous person, but they won't give out the name."
Mhm.
So he said, "Sure." So we go up there and we're walking around this house. Turns out it was her house.
Wow.
And so I found this little fur wrap, just a wrap,
Yeah.
and I bought it. And I bought it for $100 from her children, you know, and they were like, "Oh wow!" And inside the wrap
Mm.
had two initials, EM.
Oh,
It just said
wow.
EM. That was it. So there was no real proof that it was hers, but we were in her house, you know.
Yeah.
Many years later, a few years later, I was dating a guy, and his father was a furrier. And his father said, "Do you have any furs? You can keep them in my refrigerator."
Yeah.
And I said, "Sure." And I gave him that. And he thought he was doing me a favor. He took out the lining and relined it.
Oh, no.
And I was like, "Oh my God, this was bewitched."
Oh, wow.
So my original initial thing was gone. That's a
Oh,
real story. Isn't that like beyond crazy? Like,
yes. Yes. Wow. That's
yeah,
really
that
cool.
is beyond
That's
crazy. But I liked Facts of Life because it reminded me of like the high school, the 80s, you
mhm.
know, all those, you know, all those characters. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how about this? This is the last lightning round question. Growing up, or even now, favorite cartoon?
I have to say The Simpsons because they used prediction. They
Yeah.
predict things with Donald Trump.
Yeah. I thought that was really wild when I started hearing about that, and then you could
Yes.
fact check it too, and it that some of that stuff happens.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you go back and realize the dates on some of this stuff, wow,
Yeah.
it's crazy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I officially let you go on your way, first let me
Okay.
just say that this was a great interview, and I thought it was a lot of fun, and I look forward to your third book, and I will absolutely read that one as well. But
Thank you.
before you get out of here, plug your social media, plug your website so that people could see maybe appearances or anything that you know, or if your next book's ready to come out or whatever they need, and you know, you could plug your interview segment as well and just get everything out there.
Okay, great. Thanks. So my website is Dream Central Station, which is www.dreamcentralstation.com. Facebook, my name is Catherine Nadal, Nadal. And I have a Dream Central Station Facebook page, which is just Dream Central Station. I have an Instagram, which I use 90% of the time. It's Cat Witch MIC. CATWITCHNYC. I have a radio show that's every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's on BBS Radio and also plays on 102.7 WNEW on the weekends. And that's called Bringing the Darkness to the Light. It's 100% musicians like yourself. And on twice a month, I do a live radio show, which is also on BBS Radio. And I usually bring in someone from the music business, basically open the phone lines and fans can call in and ask questions. And we just recently had a guy from Broadway on and Spencer Drake from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So very busy.
That's awesome.
I
Yeah.
have, yeah, I'm going to be doing a witch festival, which is going to be in Connecticut in August. I'm going to be
Hmm.
one of their guest speakers, and that's probably going to be in Waterbury, Connecticut. There's
Wow.
a couple other events they haven't been released, but my busiest month for events is always October.
All right, excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. I'm truly amazed by the things that you can do. So it's fascinating to me. So I can't even wrap my head around it, but I love every second of it.
Well, thank you. I know the next time I see you, you're going to have a reading.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure it'll be at some kind of music event.
Exactly, right? Or one of your wrestling things.
Could be, because, there's always stuff going on. I don't know how far, you are from, like, Philly or anything like that, but
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just there for the Metallica thing, so I
hmm,
definitely would go there to see you. Yeah,
all
very
right.
cool.
Well, I'm sure we'll
Very
be in
good.
touch about it then, but thank you again. This was so cool.
Thank you. Thank you, Robbie. Take care.